Welcome to the Almost Awakened podcast. I'm your host, Bill Reel. Grateful to be back with my three good friends, Britt Hartley, Anthony Miller, and Jana Spangler. Glad to have you guys back on to have this conversation. How are you guys doing this fine Sunday morning on October 15th?
October.
Oh, I'm sorry, August 15th. I'm getting excited. In October, in the middle of the month, I'm going to a Reggae Rise Up reggae concert. And reggae music is my favorite music in the world now. And I used to never even know what it was until about a year and a half ago.
Well, it's still August, Bill.
It is August 15th. How are you guys doing?
Great.
Excellent.
Good. I just love the three of you. Anytime I see your guys' faces, I smile. You guys are just good humans. And it is so fun to be a human on a journey with other humans and to be around good people who are thinking about these big things and reading books and trying to learn and wrestle with stuff and working on themselves. And this is the journey. So here we are. This is session number 8 from Jack Kornfield. This is the Buddhist Psychology or Psychology of Buddhism. And I didn't really feel like there was a darn new thing in this entire conversation, and yet I was enthralled with every word that proceeded from his lips, and I made a ton of notes, as it sounds like you guys were thinking a lot about some of this too. I'm trying to think where to start. I know he tells this story, and he tells a joke, and I thought it was funny, and it kind of hits, I think, on what this whole session was about. He talks about this family out in the desert on camels. And the father's on a camel, the mother's on a camel, and they've got their supplies. And then on the camel behind them is all these kids. And the father turns around, looks to the kids and goes, no, we're not there yet. And would you stop asking? For crying out loud, we're nomads, right? and it's a cheesy joke. It's a dad joke. But I laughed like pretty hard at it this morning as I was listening to it again for the 4th time or whatever it is, and still chuckling at the joke. And your thoughts. We are the kids, right? We're always wondering what the next thing is. Where are we going to get there? How are we going to get this thing? How are we going to grab onto the next thing that entertains us, appeases us, makes us happy in the moment? And constantly we children on the back camel, we're chasing something that really may not be there. Your thoughts on maybe trying to help me set up kind of the paradigm for this session that we can dive into. What do you guys think about the camel joke, or what does it remind you of?
Yeah, well, I really related to it in the way that you're setting up, Bill. I mean, I think we are the children. I think our particular society, our American society, really lends itself to this. You know, we have these strong ideals of achievement and individualism and comparison and materialism and all of these forces that kind of set us up for this. You know, our first half of life is all about figuring out what the next step is, what we're going to go. We've got the path laid out. And I'm not saying those are bad things. Those are good things to help us set ourselves up for a good life. But I am just really cognizant that it's the only thing we're teaching. And so we're not set up well necessarily for more of a second half of life that gets us beyond just these pursuits, because I think there's a balance to be had between all of those pursuits and the things that we're trying to do, and that, you know, meeting the unmet desires of our heart throughout our lives. But I think the way that we go about things tends to make us skim over the surface of our lives, reacting, not really noticing what's going on, being really dependent on our outer worlds and what is actually happening to us, versus really being agents to act in our lives in more thoughtful ways.
Yeah, I love that. He talks about raw materials, and what he really means is our senses. He's talking about how we gather our perception of the world, and I like that word, raw materials, right? You've got your sight, you've got your taste, you've got your hearing, you've got your touch. That's 4 of them. You've got your taste. What's the other one I'm missing?
Smell.
And
then the 6th one is our mind, with our feelings and thoughts, is the 6th.
Yeah, and maybe the most important of them all. It is how we take in the world, and we are constantly looking for those 6 senses to be enjoyed by us, right? Like I go to a good Indian restaurant here in Southern Utah. My wife and I go about once a week and at least once every other week. And it is the most amazing food in the world. And just to taste it is like my wife, again, I don't want to get like vulgar or anything, but my wife once joked, she's like, do you want to go home and have sex, or do you want to stay here and finish this food? I'm like, oh, let's stay. This is so good. And we're doing that, right? Like we go to a concert to hear good music, and we go to a play to watch this theatrical thing happen in front of our eyes. And we're constantly wanting to enjoy the world as we perceive it, and try to knock away all those things that we don't like. The point of the session was to try to get us to see that chasing things down is never going to work. You're going to constantly be disappointed. And even in the moments when you get what you want, as soon as you get it, you now want the next thing. You're never satisfied. Any thoughts as you guys listen to this session 8 on how do we make like we've all felt being present? Certainly the 4 of us have, and certainly millions and millions and millions of others. I think maybe everyone, maybe all the billions on the earth have been present at least in a moment. How do we find that on a consistent basis? Like, what do we do to feel that all the time? I think that's what he's trying to get us at, is how do we feel that all the time? What are your guys' thoughts?
I think one place to start that he talks about, I don't have necessarily the answer to that because it's a path, right? You're learning how to do that every day, and every moment there's an opportunity to do that. And even the greatest meditators sometimes disconnect from themselves and have to come back to themselves, and that's part of the process. But one thing that he did say was that a place to start was to notice your habits, and that over time, these senses and these feelings and how it relates to our actions, you can sit and begin to notice your habits. And that, so for example, if I'm going to be personal, my family was with me the past 2 weeks, and my house is kind of like the central hub for my family to be there. And I noticed that I was just like stress eating, like just snacking throughout the day, just to it's just that moment where I just had to step back and notice, being around all of my family brings up some feelings. And the habit that I have with that is that I run to my freezer for my secret stash of chocolate, and I've been snacking on that quite a bit today. And maybe I need to just kind of name the feelings that I'm feeling, So I think a great place to start is just to look at your habits of what do I do when I feel something? Do I feel aversion, so I want to go drink too much alcohol so I don't have to feel that thing? Do I feel grasping, where I'm going to go online shopping so that I don't have to feel that thing? Or am I going to be delusional and just pretend that it's not there? Anyway, so I think in the path of trying to figure yourself out and to really know yourself and to even begin to make changes with yourself, a great place to start is just to notice what do I do when I feel sad? What do I do when my mom triggers me? What do I do when my kids are being too loud? Because there's habits there that we can actually look at and face, and that's a great just place to start, at least for me. And it's a humbling place to start, because your habits and what you do with all your feelings, it's not maybe what we would have chosen. It's something that we kind of accumulated over time, just kind of probably absentmindedly in our early years, that we now can face and begin to make decisions about.
Yeah, what really connected to me in this session, as well as that story of the kids, because it's a powerful metaphor for our experience in life, right? Yeah, that we think we don't recognize that the joy is in the journey, and we're constantly concerned about these things. And like Jana and Britt and you have referred to, is that Jack talks about our sense of grasping, aversion, or delusion affecting our experience and being manifest in habits that are dysfunctional. What I was thinking about is not this week, but the week after. My wife and I are going to go spend a week in Glacier National Park, and we're really excited to go there. We've been through the park before, but we haven't spent a week there and with intention gone on particular hikes and so forth. So we've done this planning. We figured out which hikes we're going to go on. We got our tickets to be able to drive going to the Sun Road a couple months ago when the window opened up. And as I was listening to this session, as I was thinking of the dysfunction that happens with our habits when we operate from a standpoint of grasping, aversion, or delusion, that fits into what our experience could be, or could be different this next week when we go to Glacier. Imagine hiking one of the most beautiful places in the world, and one of the most amazing hikes that you could ever go on, and coming to that experience with grasping, aversion, and delusion. So grasping, like you're all upset, that you're not going to get enough, that you're all angry about whether or not you got the right parking space, that there's too many people on the road, you're all looking at the shortfall of everything, or you're dealing it with an aversion type of standpoint, with and I'm referring to that with the judging and so forth, or with this sense of delusion that you just miss it, as opposed to being mindful to the experience of going on that hike and sharing that experience with someone you love, to experience the sight, the sound, the touch, maybe even the taste and the smell of the mindfulness of that experience, of those precious several hours on a hike, to see a view, a vista, an experience, to connect with nature in a way that is just absolutely amazing. And having that experience with grasping, aversion, and delusion, and not even realizing it because it's a habit and it destroys your experience, or your experience is so filtered that you just miss it. And that too is a metaphor for life, right? The joy is in the journey. The hike might not be as beautiful as one of these, to Avalanche Lake or the Grinnell Glacier or whatnot. It might not be that every moment of your life. In fact, it's not going to be. But if you're approaching it with these kinds of dysfunctions and habits, you're just going to miss it. And that's not freedom. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
I'll piggyback off of both of these guys. One of the things that Jack said in this at the very beginning was that basically all the teachings of the Dharma, all of the Buddhist teachings have a similar taste. He just called it this, this underlying taste. And that taste is what Anthony just mentioned. It's freedom. And I'm just noticing this in my own journey right now. I've gone back into therapy, which I haven't done in decades. Done any kind of individual therapy. And I'm just struck by how the Buddhist psychology dovetails with the kind of therapy that we do in this country, and how complementary it all is. What I'm doing is exactly what Brittany was talking about. I'm looking back to my childhood. I'm looking at all of the assumptions that I have about myself, and how my habits have developed out of these senses of the desire and aversion and delusion, and really the power is in naming this. And the thing that strikes me about this is, so many people, we think about Buddhism, and this may not be the first thing we think of. We think more of mysticism, or we think of a religion, or we think of, the karma and reincarnation and meditation and these things. But really, at the basis of it, this piece that we're talking about is actually quite scientific. This is trying to get down to the reality of what is within a person. This is something that the scientific method it's been difficult to apply. I think we do our best, but humans are a little more squishy than that. Human behavior is a little more difficult to pin down with our methods. But I think this Buddhist psychology is the best that we've got when it comes to trying to figure ourselves out, because we're getting down to what is. We're noticing these very tangible things, these senses, and what is happening with that, and what is driving that, and what is it that I'm wanting in this moment, and how is that driving what is happening and showing up in my life, in my habits, in my overeating, in my shopping, in my Netflix binging, in my substance using, in my irritability with my family, in my all of the ways that in my procrastination. That's a huge one for me. Showing up for myself in my procrastination and stopping long enough to ask myself what is going on. But I love that. I love that the Buddha, I've heard him called one of the world's first psychologists, right? Because it's actually very similar to psychotherapy, which is let's just get down to what is going on in my life and let's pay close enough attention and deep enough attention to actually do something with this.
Let's take a little detour because you hit on something so Britt mentioned alcohol and you mentioned substances and Britt mentioned chocolate and there are all these things in the world that we can accentuate what we're doing. And if I'll be a little vulnerable, I've used magic mushrooms in the past. I did ayahuasca once. And I want to maybe mention this because we all come from a system. And so a lot of these listeners are made up from folks that came from that system that had rules about what you could take into your body or what you couldn't. And we have this idea that, having the snack or drinking the drink, like some of these things do accentuate the present moment. There's nothing better than, for me, a piece of dark chocolate. Oh, my goodness. And last night I was at a bar with some friends. We were all sitting close. There was like this connection and intimacy and good conversation. And we're listening to a live band play and threw a few Mike's Hard Lemonades back. And that's kind of my drink of choice, is something sweet. And had a few of those and had a little buzz going. And the music was beautiful. I want to be clear to the audience that maybe there's nothing wrong with accentuating the present moment as much as possible while also being responsible to it. Do you have any thoughts there? Because I think this is an important little sidetrack. Do you have any thoughts on these things?
I have one. I have a story that comes to mind. I believe it's Ram Dass, where he, is famous for kind of being part of the LSD movement. And he got to the point where in order to be kind of experience that feeling of oneness, right? Oneness with all life, which is a really beautiful feeling to be a part of and really good for your mental health. But in order for him to get there, he got to the point where he was on LSD all of the time. So all of the time. And so he goes to India, right? He's got a handful of LSD pills in his pocket. And of course, meets a guru who just kind of throws it in the trash and just says, you don't need to do this all the time to do this practice, right? And so that was always just an interesting story to me. And so I just love this idea of, knowing enough about yourself to know, why are you doing this? Are you going to do mushrooms with friends because it's a very spiritual oneness kind of experience? Or are you on LSD 24 hours a day because you cannot handle life without it, right? You can't get there without it. For me, are you enjoying a piece of dark chocolate, which is a fantastic part of being human? Just a fantastic part of being human, right? Yes. Fantastic part of being human. Or am I like stuffed and making myself sick, forcing M&Ms down my throat because I'm feeling stressed because my mom's in my house, which is not actually really that pleasurable. It's just me not dealing with my feelings. So, the intent and why you're doing things and the balance and the responsibility, all those things come into play for how to enjoy pleasures, enjoy the full spectrum of the human experience without becoming dependent, without getting to the point where you're not just watching a movie where you can't function without your phone and your headphones being on because now you're using it for aversion reasons. So, it just takes a lot of self-awareness to say, what am I doing and why am I doing it?
Yeah, that's deep stuff. Like, if you're going to put music on that either you love, that just has you smiling, or put music on that's moving you to think about other things in your life. But maybe sometimes just folding the laundry without putting music on is the meditation that you need. And so it really is just being present with yourself and knowing what you need in that moment. Because there isn't a rule. There isn't a rule about what's good or what's bad. It's all myth and it's all arbitrary constructs. And you're simply trying to show up in the world, being and becoming the best human you can and enjoying the hell out of it when you can, right? And sitting with shiz when it doesn't go right and not letting it disrupt your world.
Yeah, I think it's about being awake, right, to what we're doing and why we're doing it. It's the intention. I often notice that the same things. There's a lot of talk about self-care in our world today, which I think is a really great thing. But the very same activity that is self-care can also be aversion. And I notice this in myself. One of my big vices is Netflix, right? If I sit down and I'm in aversion, I will binge watch 3 seasons of something. And at the end, I feel no more resourced than I was at the beginning. And I didn't really enjoy it. I mean, I kind of did, but it's a very different experience when I sit down and say, oh my gosh, everyone's out of the house. I don't have anything on my plate that I have to get done right this second. I'm going to sit down and watch my favorite show. And I'm just going to give myself that treat. And I can watch a couple of episodes of something with that intent. And actually, the pleasure I got from it is heightened because I was present for it and I was doing it for a reason and I was rewarding myself, and I feel far more resourced when I'm done with it. So I do the exact same thing. It's both watching Netflix, but coming at it from 2 different places. It's a completely different experience, and it actually heightens the pleasure of the thing that you're doing.
Amen. I could tell the same story about watching a boxing match once in a while and doing just something that, just not making it take over your life, but making it this piece of your life that gives you a moment to step away from other parts of your life. Like, you have one life to live. And again, we can debate what's on the other side, but you have one life to live. And how are you going to make use of it? And the days like you and the days I sit at my house and play video games for 6 hours, I'm having fun while playing. And the moment I'm done, I go like, oh my God, like that was a waste of a whole day. Like, let's do something else, but let's also play video games. Yep. Good stuff. Good stuff. Any other thoughts, Anthony, anything from you on that point before I grab the next thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's common to say that the answers are both and, that these kinds of things can enhance our sense of presence. Like, obviously, if you're with friends, listening to music, that conversation, that shared experience of music, of being together, helps facilitate an experience of being present. And also sometimes, whether it's alcohol or whatnot, that also can have an experience of facilitating that sense of connection and being present. So it can be both that, and it can be aversion and escapist, or it can be greed and grasping for sensual things at the same time. So the key is mindfulness. It's to every now and then sit back and go, okay, I'm curious about the feelings that I'm having. I'm curious about the experience that I'm having. And I'm curious about the motivations for why am I making these choices right now? So that we're doing it with thoughtfulness rather than out of habit.
Yeah. I think understanding this process, I think it's easier to see this stuff and to access it and to make good use of it, especially when things are good. It feels so much easier when I'm in the middle of a good moment to go, yeah, like this is a good moment right here. Wow. I think it's way harder when it's the difficult moments. And he tells a story. Jack Kornfield talks about Nazi Germany and Jewish concentration camps. And he says there's it's not like there's everyone, but there's always a few people who seem to be able to make the best of that horrible circumstance. And they're the ones who are going around and checking on everyone else and lifting them up in some way. And he mentions giving them their last piece of bread. And I think what I want, what I don't have yet, is a strong ability to be present and okay, or to be okay with not being okay in the harder moments. And I'm just curious, as he was talking about that, and as maybe you think about your own lives, is there any advice you have or any thoughts you have? Like, again, I know we're hitting on this process, but when my mom was dying of cancer and I was sitting in the hospice center watching it happen and watching her starve to death over like an 11-day period or whatever it was, there were moments where I tried to go like, hey, this is life. This is life. And I just had a grandson born 2 months earlier. And I thought, wow, like there is some, like in the earlier episode where the teacher talked to the students and said, why are all these things dead? And the kids put two and two together on their own and said, these things have to die so that there's space for new things to come forth. And that seemed to kind of hit at what's going on. So like we, the four of us, we understand like people do have to die and new people are born and it is life. But in the midst of all that hard stuff, it's hard to be present and it's hard to be okay with not being okay. Any thoughts from the three of you on what helps you to be more present in the hard moments? Like, I'd like to think I'm the wise person in the Jewish concentration camp, but maybe I'm just in a corner cradled in the fetal position, just crying every day.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you. That last thing you said, Bill. I think I grew up feeling like I had to be the person in the concentration camp that was there for everybody else. And it actually, that need to be something other than exactly what I was feeling, and turned to self-loathing for being the one over in the corner crying. And, I just watched a documentary that I highly recommend to people when and if it becomes available again for people. It's one that they've released a couple of times you can watch it free of charge, but it's called The Wisdom of Trauma. And you can go to thewisdomoftrauma.com to find information about this documentary. I don't know when it will be available again for viewing, but I highly recommend it. One of the really poignant things that I wrote down the quote from it because it was very poignant. It concentrates on people with substance abuse issues, the homeless, people who are in prison, and really all of us, talking about how trauma has informed us and how the adverse experiences of our life have informed what happens. And one of the things that they said in it is that one of the things that would fundamentally shift the way that we relate to one another in the society, she said, we've got to start seeing each other for what happened to us, not what's wrong with us. And I think the trick there is that when you're in the concentration camp, or when you're in just the throes of life, when things are really, really hard, rather than beating ourselves up for not being that person, it's noticing that person, having an appreciation for that person. Certainly we can hold these things as ideals, and it's going into ourselves and noticing why it isn't us. Why is that not me right now? Because there are really good reasons why it's not me right now. That's when we're able to bring some actual love and compassion and reality to our own lives.
Yeah.
I had a thought, just something that helps me to refocus when the experience that I'm in is suffering, right, or is pain. And this is heavy stuff, Bill, and I appreciate you taking us here. One of the practices that I do is to, you first kind of sit with it. Where do I feel this on my body? Well, I feel something in my throat that feels like I'm going to cry. I feel like there's something on my chest where I can't breathe. So you kind of check in with your body and what you're feeling. But then what I do is just what is being born from this pain? What is coming from this? So when I'm sitting with someone who's sick in the hospital and I'm feeling pain, what is being born in this pain? Because if you look for something there, I can always find something that it's life, right? If something is dying, something is coming to life. And so when something is painful, something is dying, a relationship is ending, someone's life is ending, if you look, there's also life somewhere too. And I find that to be a really great way of balancing myself when I feel like I'm just in it, like I'm just in suffering. And so for chronic pain or something like that, what is being born out of this? Oh, I'm much more compassionate, right? Or I'm much more appreciative of my health. Or if someone's dying, I'm just much more appreciative of the time that I have with them. And I just think it's such a beautiful practice to just kind of always look for, if you're in a place of death and suffering, something is coming to life there that can be really beautiful and a full part of the human experience if you look for it. And that kind of helps balance me out when I'm just kind of really in it.
Yeah, this really fits into the conversation in terms of how do we react with these things that he's talking about, like greed or grasping, aversion, being judgmental, being deluded or oblivious to things.
And he uses the word confusion too. Like
He uses confusion, as the opposite of freedom, but what he explains here is that the more we grasp, the more sorrow we experience. The more that we react with these habits, the more difficult the experience is. So a couple of things that he talks about, he asks, who are you when you are not defined by wanting? He says, imagine meeting people for who they are rather than an experience of wanting or judging them when you're with them. He asks, how do we touch the sorrows of life? When are we identified by our weaknesses or by our insecurities or by our sense of seeking for control, as opposed to approaching things that our identity would be he doesn't say our identity is our being, but that's what Eckhart Tolle would say is our identity is our being. But Jack talks about approaching things, very difficult things, with a sense of mindfulness and gratitude, that it takes deep strength to be able to sit with something and let go, to love, trust, to come from a place of forgiveness, compassion, and attention. And you've alluded to, we all came from a system, and it's not, limited to the system of the faith tradition that we were born out of. It's very common in Western culture that we experience discomfort and then we try to fix it. And so when people are experiencing pain or sorrow, we try to, rather than sit with them in it, we try to fix it. Like we try to make it transactional. Rather than just, sometimes the best thing to do is say, I don't really have any great answers, but I want you to know that I'm here for you now, and I'm going to sit with you in this, and that I love you, and I am so deeply grateful to be with you in this experience. That's very different than trying to co-opt their story and attribute meaning to their experience in a way to try to fix it, because we're coming from a belief system where discomfort means that it's not from God.
That goes back to what you said earlier about freedom and the concentration camp story. I mean, when you're in the concentration camp, your entire external world is controlled, right? And so the ultimate freedom in that moment, the ultimate freedom maybe any human could have ever experienced, was to say, when the whole world around me is treating me like I'm inhumane, I'm going to give my last piece of bread to someone. And I feel that my belly is hungry, and I feel that my body doesn't want to do this, and I feel like there's a part of my mind that doesn't want to do this. But that ultimate act of pure freedom to say, I'm going to choose to be who I want to be, even when the world around me is literally going to, is just the most hellish experience on earth. That is ultimate freedom.
Yeah, I love that, Britt. That's, Jack talked about that. That ultimate freedom is our ability to choose within ourselves how we are going to react. That's the one thing that we always have, that freedom, if we're awake enough to understand what's going on. And that's why this is the path to freedom, right? If you're noticing these things, and it's helpful to have these guideposts of desire and aversion and delusion. It gives us something to point to where it's going awry. But the freedom comes from paying attention to it, noticing, oh, I am in aversion. Then what that opens up is we get to soften into something like self-compassion or love. That gives us that choice then when we notice. If we don't notice, we're just reacting and we're not free. But if we are noticing, then we can say, okay, I'm feeling desire here, but how can I transmute that into generosity? Here's now I'm in delusion. I'm noticing the things that I'm waking up to some things that I wasn't even aware of. That how do I transmute that into wisdom to move into something positive in my life?
Yeah. So this may sound weird. I didn't plan on saying this. This just came up as you guys were talking, but hanging around my friends. And some of those friends I know better, and some of those friends I know a little less, and getting to know them better. And most of these folks are married couples. These are people who have their history with each other, and they have their own rituals with each other. They have their own way of handling the disturbances that they're giving each other. And it's actually really cool in this kind of mindset to sit with your friends when you've come into their life late in the game where you have some of your shit worked out and you don't have the same history with them. And so you get to be this, I don't know how to explain it other than to say a safe person that they get to interact with, and they get to step out of their patterns. Because you're not following up their comment with a poke or a criticism. They're not coming back at you with anything. And you get to be, if you're really cool, like if you're really in touch with this, you get to notice that they're interacting with you different than they do their partner. And you're giving them the space to not feel judged or shame, which we can't help in our relationships. My wife and I, we're screwing it up almost daily. We have a great marriage, and yet there's probably once every 2 weeks where for about a 5 minute to an hour span, we wonder if we're ever going to make this work and be with each other, right? And sometimes my wife says something, and I know she's saying that thing because of my history of manipulating or causing shame. So now I see her showing up in a way that, it just points to how hard I was on her. And it's fun to kind of step into these other connections with people and not have all that baggage, and get to let somebody just show up in their humanity and get to just be them. And I think when you talk about like being aware, like, okay, I'm hungry too. Like we all have needs to tell our story and to get what we want from whatever relationships we have in our life. It's fun sometimes just to sit back and let that piece of you that's just a little smarter, a little wiser, make space for people to have the greatest evening of their week because you just listened and you just asked questions and you got the chance to kind of just make them feel really good for an evening. Anyway, I just think some of this stuff can be really magical when you let it happen and you're aware that it's happening. Anyway, just me rambling for a moment. It was one of those moments. I've had several of those moments this week, but one of those moments last night, hanging out with friends, and just I see my wife and I's patterns. I see their patterns, and by talking to one of them in our own conversation, they were allowed to not be in those patterns for a little bit.
Yeah, I think one of the things you're pointing to, Bill, and I think this is so important, is to protect spaces in our lives where we can pull ourselves out of the day-to-day grind, out of the day-to-day relationships, so that we can get perspective of these things. Because when you're in the battlefield, sometimes we don't have the space. We don't have the space to self-reflect. We don't have the space to notice our patterns. We don't have the space for that. And when you have these lighter moments, these lighter places, whether it's with friends or with yourself or with nature or with however you do that, I think there are a million ways to get that, to pull yourself out of the day-to-day. But it's so important to do it. And then it's really important to take what you're resourcing yourself with there and bring those lessons back to our long-term relationships, because our long-term relationships, whether it's family, a significant other, friends, whatever, you're right. Those patterns have been built up. Those habits, that's where they show up. Relationship can be our biggest teacher. It's a big opportunity for us to go inward and say, oh, yep, that person is triggering all my stuff. It's bringing up all of those habits from the time I was a child. So it's a fruitful place, but if we're always doing that, if that's always where we are, we're not going to make much traction. I think we have to have those lighter moments.
Yeah. Jack calls that sacred presence. Being aware.
I had a reminder of what you were saying, Jana, recently. So in Boise, there's a group of women therapists that are friends of mine, and they've found that they needed to get together because when they're with their friends or family or at work, they have a certain kind of therapist hat on, right? Of asking certain questions and being that person that they just they put on that hat, and that hat kind of gets stuck. And so in this group of therapists, and I met them for lunch, and it was this group of women who rarely have a space because they're the person with the hat on for the most of their professional life and a lot of their friendships, that they took off the hat just to say, my marriage is really rough right now, or I thought I believed this and I don't believe this anymore and I don't know what to do and my kid's mad, and just to be like fully human. And so it was just so humbling to me to see these therapists, women that I really look up to, who really have resources and they understand this, even they need to get away from the habits that they have in order to sit at lunch with someone and say, my marriage is rough right now and I need some outside advice or whatever it is. And that was just really humbling for me, that even the most amazing women that I just sometimes imagine just must have no problems with their personal lives need those moments to be fully human too.
Yeah. We've gone a little long here. I love all of that. And I know I've got like 8 other notes that we're not going to touch on today, but let me at least finish with this one, which is he kind of concludes that to be Buddha, and I'm going to screw this up, so please come in and add your 2 cents and kind of round this up. To be Buddha is to be unconnected from everything. And what that means to me is to just realize you are not any of those things. You're not your taste. You're not your smell. You're not what you're seeing. You're not what you're hearing. You're not even what you're thinking. That you are something else. So you're unconnected from everything because you're not any of those things, but you also are connected to everything because you are part of this universe, and so is everyone else and every other thing, inanimate or animate object in your world. And your consciousness plays the trick of telling you that you are something separate. The voice in your head that says you are Jana Spangler, you are Anthony Miller, you are Britt Hartley, and who you are is to be honest, it's lying to you. You are one with everything, and you are none of it. And to be Buddha is that, in the sense that you're not any of those things. And he kind of uses this right at the end, because I think that mindset is trying to teach us to disconnect from associating ourselves as being something, and that association, recognizing it and disconnecting from it, is part of this sacred presence. Your guys' thoughts?
I would just want to end with, we talked about grasping and aversion and delusion. And so the opposite of those, when you're trying to get away from living with those 3 things, is kind of your base. The 3 words he used were openness. So just kind of a curiosity and an openness to what the fullness of life is and could be. And then clarity. So am I trying my best to look at things as they really are? And then love. Can I understand this person enough that I can see that they're just as worthy of love as I think that I am? And, those, I don't claim to be really succeeding in any 3 of those. But I love this idea of just trying to shift from living from a place of grasping for the next thing, averting pain, delusion, to openness, clarity, and then coming from a place of, can I look at this person as someone really deserving of love? And that is a sweet, that's a shift of where your operating system. It's a shift of your personal operating system, and that's where you're headed, towards ultimate freedom and joy and relationships that are just really fueled by love, instead of your own ego messing up with greed and jealousy and all those things that get in the way from just loving and being loved, which is the greatest human thing you can experience, which is to love and be loved.
Amen.
I love that. I see this going both ways in a lot of the work that I do in my life coaching. There are many of us, and it's all us at the same time. We have different times in our lives where it's like, I really need to reach out and see this other person as having worth. I also see it really commonly where people can't attach to their own worth, and they actually have to see someone else that they admire and notice their worth and notice the compassion that they can have for them in their weakness before they can even, they have to use that as a tool to then be able to reflect back to themselves their own worthiness. Tara Brach, who is one of she's a really beautiful voice of someone who is bringing together psychology and this Buddhist thought and Buddhist psychology. And she talks about how in our society we have an epidemic of, she calls it the trance of unworthiness, because of some of those forces I spoke about earlier, of just the achievement mentality in our society. And so I think it's really important, what Bill is talking about here in attaching to our Buddha nature. And that's a phrase that I've really kind of hung on to as I've been introduced to some of this Buddhist thought, is this idea of Buddha nature. Because it's a new enough phrase for me that it means something to me, I guess. I have enough psychic distance from it. But it's the way that I can start to counteract that trance of unworthiness within myself, is to notice this Buddha nature that really does exist within all of us and all of creation if we look for it. It's that sacred, that divine. And the way that I attach to it and know that it's there when I'm in my worst places, doubting that it exists within me, all I have to do is notice that what I respond to is what inspires me in this world. I start noticing those things. It's love, it's connection, it's inspiring stories of people overcoming. Like, I think that's something that we all tend to have in common as human beings. If you start to notice the things that really help us feel good and that we can do good in the world, we all have access to this deep kind of reservoir of love and goodness inside of us. I really believe that. So if we start to notice that, that Buddha nature, start to notice more about how we've moved through the world and what has happened to us, rather than what I'm screwing up again this time. It's a huge thing to start to notice the stories we've been telling ourselves about our nature and tapping into this really beautiful Buddha nature. There's really something to this. And I think it's one of the harder things for us to grasp, but it's one of the things that I notice every wisdom tradition, and especially the contemplative traditions, point to, is this existence of a true self, of a Buddha nature, of a big heart, big mind, something inside us that can transcend the minutia of the experience that we're living in the world.
Yeah, Eckhart Tolle has another, kind of set of words to describe what we're talking about here. He talks about attachment to form, and attachment to form can be attachment to a belief or a paradigm that our worthiness is based on those forms, and that we're either falling short or with another sense of ego that we are worthy because we're attached to those forms. Like it's dysfunctional either way, this attachment to form. And then the disattachment from form is recognizing that our being is separate from our forms, that our being is inherently worthy and part of something greater than ourselves. And it takes work to shed the ego. It takes work and mindfulness and contemplative practices to disattach from form in terms of how we view our worthiness. But I would add that the power is not only in recognizing that we are part of a greater organism, that our being is part of something that is inherently worthy just because it exists. But another part of that experience is recognizing that every human being we meet is the same. Like, they are inherently worthy just because they exist, in spite of their forms, for good or bad. It changes our experience with other human beings as well.
I love that. You meet somebody and you meet somebody and you're like, okay, there's a cool person. I want to get to know them. And as you get to know anybody, you spend enough time, you start to see their blind spots and their flaws and their mechanisms and, what the pieces of them that aren't healthy. And yet they're doing the same thing with you, by the way. And then if you're in this space where you're thinking this way, you start to sense they're just you under a different set of circumstances, born with a different set of predispositions, with different trauma throughout the history of their ancestors. And then you start to see, like, when they do something, you go like, oh, I get why they do that. They're just doing them the best they can, just like I'm doing me the best I can. It makes you appreciate the sacredness of not just being a human being, but the sacredness of life. And I love it. Earlier, Anthony, you mentioned born out of the system we all came from. And when you first said it, I thought, did he say that right? Like, because I was born, maybe some of us were born into the, no. But I think you nailed it. We are all, as we're awakening, we're all being born out of whatever was before. And I thought that phrase was just beautiful. I wanted to mention it again because it really stuck to me as you said it earlier. The three of you are brilliant, and I love you three to pieces. Thanks for your time. I know we went a little bit over an hour this time, but what a good conversation. I hope people are listening to this stuff, because this is the kind of stuff I want to get up on Sunday morning and have the three of you, and we'll just jump in the hot tub. We'll have to wait a little bit because it's Southern Utah and it's 115 degrees here, but jump in the hot tub, have a cup of coffee, and just talk like this for hours. This is the kind of stuff I love. But thank you three for your time today. Any other last thoughts before we end it?
No, it's great talking about this stuff. It's, even though the words are coming out of our mouths, it's just like a lesson back to yourself, because, I feel inspired for what I want to do today. I feel just so gracious to have you guys in my corner. And so it's the kind of sermons, or it's the kind of lessons that you give that you're just teaching yourself, because we're all in this process, and we're all on the struggle bus with it as humans. Yeah. And so I feel very inspired on my Sunday. So I appreciate that, Bill.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah, I agree. This is one of those spaces where I get to come out of my life and get resourced and talk about good and important things, and remind myself of all of the things that I know, but it's going to take me my entire life to get it into my bones. So I'm grateful for this time as well.
Love it.
Elegantly expressed. Yeah. We get to explore and learn ourselves. We get to express, and then we get to have it mirrored back to us, all in a great experience. It's totally worth it.
I have been smiling the whole time. So thank you three for making for a great morning for me. And like you three are all pointing to, and now I feel ready to go take on my day in a different way now. So thank you. Thank you a lot. All right. I'll let it go. I'm not going to end here with me crying. All right. Have a great day. Take it easy.
Bye.